You know what they say about civilized society? It's always civilized right up until you're standing on an auction block with a price tag hanging around your neck. My name is Zara, and 3 months ago I was a senior atmospheric engineer on Kelani Prime. Today I'm lot number 47 in what the locals cheerfully call the Nexus Station Acquisition Center. Because apparently calling it a slave market would be rude. The Hegemony came to our world with promises of liberation and prosperity. Funny how liberation always seems to involve shackles and prosperity never quite makes it to the people being liberated. They said our peaceful little planet needed protection from dangerous elements in the galaxy. Turns out the most dangerous element was them showing up in the first place. Now here I am, standing in a cramped holding pen that smells like industrial disinfectant and despair, watching Grex work the crowd. Grex is our charming four-armed auctioneer, a bel Terran who treats sentient beings like used hover cars. He's got that sleazy salesman smile down to an art form, the kind that makes you want to check your pockets after shaking hands. Ladies, gentlemen, and assorted gender-fluid entities, Grex announces with the enthusiasm of someone hawking energy drinks at a sporting event that today we have some premium merchandise for your consideration. Engineers, pilots, medical specialists, all fresh from recent liberation efforts. Liberation efforts. That's what they're calling it now. I suppose it sounds better than conquest and enslavement in the quarterly reports. The buyers mill around like they're shopping for furniture. There's Lady Vex TA, a crystalline aristocrat whose family owns half the mining rights in the Outer Rim. She's looking for domestic staff, which is a polite way of saying she wants someone to clean her mansion and pretend to be grateful for the privilege. Then there's Representative Cull from the Hegemony Industrial Complex, scouting for technical specialists to work in their asteroid mining operations. The kind of work where workplace safety is more of a suggestion than a requirement. My personal favorite is Commander Thex, a military contractor who buys slaves for hazardous duty assignments. His species evolved from pack hunters, and it shows. He's got the kind of predatory patience that makes your skin crawl, like he's calculating exactly how long you'll last before you become expendable. The whole scene is wonderfully ironic. Here we are, surrounded by representatives of the galaxy's most advanced civilizations, and they're participating in an institution that would make medieval Earth look progressive. But hey, at least they do it with proper documentation and tax receipts. Grex has been warming up the crowd for 20 minutes, describing the various skills and specializations available for purchase. He talks about us like we're appliances with warranty plans. Premium education, low maintenance, excellent work ethic under proper supervision. He's particularly proud of his return policy, which apparently doesn't exist. The other prisoners, merchandise, stand in their holding areas with the kind of resigned despair that comes from watching your entire worldview collapse in real time. There's Corin, a navigation specialist from the same planet who keeps muttering prayers to gods that apparently weren't paying attention when the Hegemony showed up. There's Dr. Vess, a medical researcher whose crime was developing treatments that cut into pharmaceutical profits. The whole setup is designed to be as dehumanizing as possible. We're not people with names and histories and dreams. We're assets with skill sets and productivity ratings. The buyers discuss our qualifications like they're comparing processor speeds on data tablets. But you know what the really funny part is? These same civilizations spend their time talking about the barbarism of primitive species. They write academic papers about the moral development of spacefaring cultures. They hold conferences on ethical governance and social progress. And then they come here to buy people like they're ordering lunch. The irony is so thick you could cut it with a plasma torch. Just when I thought this day couldn't get any more surreal, something walked through the auction house doors that made everyone stop and stare. And in a room full of six-legged insectoids, crystalline rock people, and beings that looked like jellyfish with attitude problems, that was saying something. It was a human. I knew this because humans had become something of a galactic curiosity since they'd started poking around the outer systems about 5 years ago. Most species had heard rumors about these weird bipedal deathworlders who came from a planet that actively tried to kill everything living on it, but actually seeing one was still pretty rare. This particular human looked like he'd gotten lost on his way to somewhere much more boring. Average height, unremarkable features, wearing what appeared to be some kind of uniform that was probably official but looked like casual wear. He had the kind of face that would disappear in a crowd, except for his eyes. His eyes had this peculiar quality, like he was constantly amused by some private joke the rest of the universe wasn't in on. The other buyers immediately started whispering among themselves, and not in a good way. Humans had a reputation as unpredictable, possibly dangerous, and definitely weird. They came from a Class 12 death world, which meant their planet fell into the category of places where everything, including the weather, was actively trying to murder you. Most civilized species avoided Class 12 worlds the same way you'd avoid a reactor meltdown. "Excuse me," the human said, raising his hand like he was in a classroom. "Is this where you buy people?" The entire auction house went quiet. Grex's forearms froze mid-gesture, his sales pitch dying in his throat. You could hear the environmental systems humming. "We prefer the term acquisition of skilled labor assets," Grex finally managed, his voice carefully neutral. "Right," the human nodded thoughtfully. "And these skilled labor assets, they get to choose whether they want to be acquired?" Several buyers started looking uncomfortable. This wasn't the kind of question you were supposed to ask. It was like asking a restaurant where the meat came from while you were eating it. "The acquisition process is fully legal under Hegemony Commercial Code Section 12 Alpha, Grex recited, falling back on bureaucratic language like a security blanket. "That's not what I asked," the human pointed out with the patience of someone explaining something to a child. "I asked if they get to choose." More uncomfortable shifting. Lady Vexta made a sound like crystal wind chimes having an argument. Commander Thex's hunting instincts were clearly telling him this human might be trouble, but his confused prey identification systems couldn't figure out what kind of trouble. The human, apparently oblivious to the tension he was creating, walked over to the holding pens and started looking at us with the kind of expression you'd use to evaluate a particularly interesting technical problem. But here's the weird part. He wasn't looking at us like we were merchandise. He was looking at us like we were people who happened to be in a really awkward situation. "This seems inefficient," he announced to no one in particular. "If you need skilled workers, why not just post job openings? A competitive salary, benefits package, vacation time. You'd probably get better results than whatever this is." Grex's commission-based worldview couldn't process this concept. But then they could leave whenever they wanted. "Yeah," the human agreed cheerfully. "That's usually how jobs work." You could practically hear the collective mental processing as every alien in the room tried to figure out if this human was dangerously naive or dangerously clever. The thing is, humans had this reputation for being either completely harmless or absolutely terrifying, with no middle ground. And nobody could ever tell which one you were dealing with until it was too late. "Are you here to make a purchase? Or are you conducting some kind of social experiment?" Representative Cull demanded, his patience clearly wearing thin. "Oh, I'm definitely here to buy someone," the human replied casually. "I need an engineer for a work project." This seemed faster than going through corporate HR. And that's when I realized this day was about to get much, much weirder. When Grex finally got around to auctioning me off, I was expecting the usual corporate bidding war. Lady Vexta needed engineers for her private projects. The mining consortium always needed technical specialists who couldn't quit, and Commander Thex collected experts like some people collected vintage weapons. The bidding started at 50,000 galactic credits, which is apparently what my entire life was worth to these people. Lady Vexta opened with a casual raise to 75,000. Representative Cull countered with 100,000, the kind of money that could buy a small spacecraft or a really nice house on most civilized worlds. I was watching my future get decided by people who'd never bothered to learn my name when the human casually raised his hand. 2 million, he said, like he was ordering coffee. The entire auction house went dead silent. 2 million credits was more money than most planetary governments spent on infrastructure projects. It was the kind of sum that made people question your sanity, your financial backing, or both. Grex's forearms started trembling slightly. His commission on 2 million credits would let him retire to one of those luxury space stations where the artificial gravity was perfectly calibrated and the recycled air actually smelled good. Did you say 2 million? Grex stammered. Yeah, is that not enough? The human asked, sounding genuinely concerned. I can go higher if there's still competition. Lady Vexthay made a sound like expensive crystal breaking. Representative Cull's breathing apparatus started working overtime. Commander Thex looked like he was calculating whether this human represented a business opportunity or a threat that needed eliminating. Sir, that's considerably above market value for technical specialists, Grex managed, trying to maintain his professional composure while internally calculating his retirement plans. Market value is what someone's willing to pay, right? The human replied with the logic of someone who'd never taken an economics class. She looks like she doesn't want to be here, and I hate awkward situations. 2 million seems fair for avoiding awkwardness. This was not how auction houses were supposed to work. People bid strategically, carefully calculating value against cost. They didn't just throw around amounts that could fund small wars because someone looked uncomfortable. But apparently humans did. The payment processing took longer than the actual bidding. It turned out the human had access to a military-grade financial account with the kind of credit limit that made bank managers nervous and accountants require therapy. The transaction went through with the smooth efficiency of someone buying lunch, except lunch didn't usually cost more than some planet's gross domestic product. While Grex processed the paperwork with shaking hands, I found myself staring at this human who just purchased me like I was an expensive impulse buy. He didn't look like someone who had access to that kind of money. He looked like a mid-level bureaucrat who'd wandered into the wrong building. So he said, turning to me with that same casual demeanor, "I'm Jack Morrison. I work for the Terran Colonial Survey Department. Are you actually an engineer? Or was that just marketing?" I was still processing the fact that I'd just been bought by someone who treated galactic slave markets like a minor inconvenience. "I'm Zara. And yes, I'm actually an atmospheric systems engineer." "Perfect," Jack nodded approvingly. "I hate when people exaggerate on their resumes. It really makes team dynamics awkward." Team dynamics. He was talking about team dynamics. I'd just been purchased for enough money to buy a small moon, and he was worried about workplace relationships. The other buyers were still staring at us like we'd violated some fundamental law of physics, which in their experience we probably had. Civilized species didn't just throw money around for ethical reasons. They calculated costs and benefits. They maximized profits and minimized expenses. They didn't spend millions of credits to avoid awkward social situations. But humans apparently did. As we headed toward the exit, I caught Grex watching us with the expression of someone who wasn't entirely sure what had just happened but was definitely going to retire early because of it. The other aliens were already starting to whisper among themselves, like probably trying to figure out what kind of species casually threw around that kind of money for a single technical specialist. What they didn't realize yet was that they'd just witnessed something that would become a recurring theme in human-alien relations. Humans had this terrible habit of treating things that were supposed to be complicated as if they were simple, and things that were supposed to be simple as if they were impossibly complex. And somehow, it always seemed to work out in their favor. Jack's ship was not what I expected from someone who'd just casually dropped 2 million credits on a single employee. It was a modest mid-range survey vessel, the kind of functional spacecraft that prioritized utility over comfort. The first thing that hit me was the smell: coffee. Really strong coffee mixed with something that might have been artificial vanilla, and the lingering scent of what I later learned was called pizza. "Welcome to the Wanderer," Jack announced, tossing his jacket onto a chair with the casual attitude of someone giving an office tour. "Coffee's in the galley, bathrooms down the hall, and your quarters are the second door on the right. Wi-Fi password is DeathWorld 123, with a capital D, and the numbers are actual numbers, not spelled out." I stood there waiting for the other shoe to drop. The chains, the restrictions, the detailed explanation of my new slave duties. Instead, Jack started making what appeared to be another cup of coffee, while humming something that sounded like music, but was probably what humans considered music. "Shouldn't you be explaining my duties and restrictions?" I finally asked. "Oh, right," Jack nodded, stirring his coffee with the spoon that had apparently been left in the sink. Your official title is Atmospheric Systems Specialist, Grade 7. Standard Terran Colonial Survey pay scale, which works out to about 45,000 credits annually, plus benefits and hazard pay. Vacation time accrues at 2 days per month, and we've got a pretty decent health plan. I stared at him. You're talking about employment benefits? Well, yeah, what else would I be talking about? I'm a slave. You bought me. At an auction. Jack paused, coffee cup halfway to his lips, and looked genuinely puzzled. That was a job fair, right? Weird setup, but the government's been pushing us to consider non-traditional recruitment methods. The casual wrongness of this statement was so profound that I couldn't immediately respond. This human had walked into a slave market, spent enough money to destabilize small economies, and apparently thought he was participating in some kind of unconventional hiring process. Jack, I said carefully, that was a slave auction. Those people were buying sentient beings as property. That doesn't make any sense, Jack replied, settling into a chair with his coffee. Slavery's illegal under about 47 different galactic conventions. Plus, it's economically inefficient. Happy workers are productive workers. And that's when I realized that Jack Morrison, senior surveyor for the Terran Colonial Survey Department, was either the most naive being in the galaxy or the most dangerous. Possibly both. So what exactly do you need an atmospheric systems engineer for? I asked, deciding to focus on practical matters while my worldview finished collapsing. We're documenting human colony installations for the Galactic Council, Jack explained, pulling out a data tablet that looked like it had been through several small wars. Apparently there's some concern about humans establishing settlements in unauthorized locations. What kind of unauthorized locations? Oh, you know, places other species consider uninhabitable. Death worlds, hostile environments, planets where the local wildlife is actively carnivorous, that sort of thing. The way he said it, you'd think humans setting up colonies on planets designed to kill everything living on them was perfectly normal, like commenting on the weather or discussing lunch plans. And the Galactic Council wants you to document these colonies because bureaucratic compliance mostly. They want to make sure we're following proper safety protocols and environmental guidelines. Standard government oversight stuff. Jack took another sip of his coffee. Between you and me, I think they're just worried we might be doing something dangerous. The understatement of this remark was so massive it had its own gravitational field. Jack, I said slowly, humans have established colonies on death worlds. Plural. Multiple death worlds. Well, yeah, regular planets are boring. Plus, they're usually already occupied, and it's rude to show up and start building settlements on someone else's property. So instead of competing for habitable real estate like every other species in the galaxy, humans had decided to colonize places that actively tried to murder anyone stupid enough to land there. And they were treating this like a reasonable housing decision. How many of these colonies are there? Jack consulted his tablet, scrolling through what appeared to be a very long list. Currently, about 237 operational settlements, with another 53 in various stages of development. Nearly 300 human colonies on worlds that should have killed them all within the first week. And the Galactic Council wanted Jack to file reports about whether they were following proper safety protocols. I was beginning to understand why aliens found humans confusing. 3 days later, we arrived at Jack's current assignment, a planet designated as Kepler 442c in the official records in New Perth by the humans who decided to live there. The first sign that this might not be a typical colony inspection was when our ship's sensors started screaming warnings about atmospheric toxicity, seismic instability, and what the computer cheerfully described as multiple existential threats to biological life. Oh good, Jack said, reading the sensor data like it was a weather report. The acid rain season's starting early this year. That should make the mineral extraction more efficient. I was staring at readings that suggested this planet was actively trying to kill us before we even landed. The atmosphere had sulfuric acid content that would dissolve most spacecraft hulls. The local flora appeared to be carnivorous. The fauna was rated as extremely hostile to foreign biological matter. Even the geology was unstable, with tectonic activity that suggested the planet enjoyed rearranging itself on a regular basis. "Jack," I said, trying to keep my voice level, "this planet is classified as a Class 15 death world." Class 15. The scale only goes up to 15. "Yeah, it's pretty lively," Jack agreed, beginning the landing sequence with the casual confidence of someone parking a hovercar. "Wait until you meet the settlers. They're really enthusiastic about the local ecosystem." Enthusiastic. About an ecosystem that was designed like a biological weapons testing facility. The colony itself was visible from orbit, which was impressive considering it was located on a continent that appeared to be mostly composed of active volcanoes and things that wanted to eat you. What was more impressive was that it looked thriving. Geometric patterns of agriculture, industrial facilities, even what appeared to be recreational areas. "How long has this colony been established?" I asked, watching the environmental readings fluctuate between hazardous and immediately fatal. "About 4 years, Jack replied, bringing us in for a landing at what appeared to be a proper spaceport, complete with ground control and traffic management. It started with about 50 families. Now they're up to nearly 2,000 residents. 2,000 humans had voluntarily moved to a planet that could kill them in approximately 17 different ways. And they'd not only survived but expanded their population by a factor of 40. The landing pad was surrounded by what I initially thought were defensive barriers but turned out to be gardens. Gardens full of plants that were clearly native to this death world, arranged in decorative patterns like someone had decided to landscape with biological hazards. Our greeting committee consisted of 3 humans who looked like they were attending a casual social gathering rather than living on a planet that should have killed them years ago. They were wearing what appeared to be normal clothing, breathing the toxic air without protective equipment, and smiling like they were genuinely happy to see visitors. "Jack," called out a woman who appeared to be the colony administrator. "Good to see you again. How was the trip?" "Not bad. Picked up a new team member," Jack replied, gesturing toward me. "Zara, meet Emma. Emma runs the agricultural development program here." "Nice to meet you," Emma said with the cheerful demeanor of someone discussing flower arrangements instead of living on a planet where the rain could dissolve metal. "Hope you don't mind the weather. We're expecting a sulfuric acid storm later this afternoon, but it should clear up by evening." She was talking about acid storms like other people talked about light showers. "The agricultural program," I managed to ask, "what exactly are you growing here?" "Oh, mostly native species," Emma replied enthusiastically. "The local carnivorous plants are incredibly efficient protein producers once you figure out how to harvest them safely. And the acid-resistant root vegetables are perfect for trade exports. Plus, they taste great in stir-fry." They were farming the carnivorous plants. They'd turned a biological hazard into a food source. "What about the local wildlife?" I asked, dreading the answer. "Fantastic for security purposes," said another colonist, apparently the settlement safety coordinator. "Nothing gets past the perimeter without the stalker lizards letting us know. And they're surprisingly good with kids once they get used to human scent." They domesticated the predatory wildlife and turned them into guard dogs. This wasn't a colony. This was a demonstration that humans could take the most hostile environment in the galaxy and turn it into a suburban neighborhood. That evening, after watching humans casually stroll through acid rain while discussing their weekend plans, I cornered Jack in what passed for the colony's administrative center. It was a modest building that had apparently been constructed using local materials, which meant the walls were made from something that should have been toxic to most carbon-based life forms. "We need to talk," I said. "Sure," Jack replied, settling into a chair that appeared to be upholstered with the hide of something that had probably been trying to eat someone last week. "What's on your mind?" "Our mission. The real one." Jack's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. That casual, slightly befuddled demeanor flickered for just a moment, like a mask slipping. "I'm not sure what you mean," he said carefully. "The Galactic Council isn't monitoring human colonies out of concern for safety protocols," I continued. "They're monitoring them because they're terrified. You've established nearly 300 settlements on worlds that should be uninhabitable. You've turned death worlds into thriving communities. And you're doing it faster than any species in galactic history. Jack was quiet for a long moment, staring at his coffee cup like it contained the secrets of the universe. The thing about bureaucracy, he finally said, is that it's really easy to game if you understand how it works. The Galactic Council gets reports, lots of reports, and they make decisions based on those reports. So the trick is making sure the reports tell the right story. What story are you telling them? That humans are lucky, enthusiastic, and not particularly bright, Jack replied with a slight smile. Every report I file emphasizes how surprisingly successful these colonies are, how grateful we are for the Council's guidance, and how much we're looking forward to continued cooperation with galactic authorities. I was beginning to understand. You're making humans sound harmless. Harmless, well-meaning, and just competent enough to be useful without being threatening, Jack confirmed. It's a delicate balance. Too successful and they start worrying we're expansionist. Too unsuccessful and they write us off as irrelevant. But you're not harmless. Of course not. We're colonizing the galaxy's most hostile real estate at a rate that would make the old colonial empires jealous. We're turning uninhabitable death worlds into garden spots. And we're doing it with technology that other species consider primitive. The scope of what he was describing started to sink in. How many other surveyors are there? About 53, last count. Each one covering a different sector, filing reports that make human expansion look like a happy accident instead of a coordinated strategy. And the Galactic Council doesn't suspect anything? Jack's smile widened slightly. They think we're too disorganized to pull off a proper conquest, too individualistic to coordinate on a galactic scale, too focused on our own little projects to be a real threat to established powers. While they were thinking that, humans had quietly claimed territory that no one else wanted, in places no one else could survive, using methods no one else understood. It was conquest by misdirection, expansion by appearing too harmless to worry about. So what happens now? I asked. Now you decide whether you want to help me continue filing reports about how surprisingly successful and diplomatically cooperative these harmless human colonies are, Jack replied. Or you can go back to your previous career in atmospheric engineering, though I should mention the pay is better working for the Colonial Survey Department. I thought about the slave market where I'd spent 3 months as merchandise. I thought about the civilized galactic society that treated sentient beings like industrial equipment. I thought about humans who'd casually colonized 300 death worlds while filing paperwork that made it sound like they'd stumbled into success by accident. What kind of benefits package are we talking about? I asked. Full medical, dental, vision care, 4 weeks paid vacation, and a retirement plan that's actually funded, Jack replied. Plus hazard pay for visiting planets that are actively trying to kill us. And my job would be helping you convince the galaxy's most advanced civilizations that humans are too incompetent to be dangerous? While they quietly take over all the real estate nobody else wants, turn it into thriving communities, and establish a colonial network that spans the galaxy, yes. I looked around the administrative center, with its walls made from local death world materials and its furniture upholstered in predator hide. Outside, I could hear humans chatting about their plans for tomorrow's acid rain harvest. You know what the really funny part is? I said. What's that? What's that? You actually are too disorganized and individualistic to pull off a traditional conquest. You're succeeding because you're not trying to be threatening. You're just being yourselves, and yourselves happens to be the most accidentally terrifying species the galaxy has ever seen. That's the beauty of it, Jack agreed. We don't have to pretend to be harmless. We just have to pretend that being able to colonize death worlds is normal instead of absolutely insane. I thought about it for another moment, then held out my hand. Zara Kelani, Atmospheric Systems Specialist, Terran Colonial Survey Department. Jack shook it with the satisfaction of someone who'd just closed a successful business deal. Welcome to the team. Oh, and Zara? You might want to update your resume. Something tells me this job is going to be very interesting. Outside, the acid rain was starting to fall, and and someone was playing what sounded like human music on a sound system that had probably been built from salvaged Death World materials. It was, I realized, the sound of the galaxy's most passive-aggressive conquest in progress. And somehow I was okay with that.